I went book shopping. I'm really excited.
Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scrivener and I like books and I like reading. This is a vlog where there's just going to be many random shots of me reading and me writing and me talking about books and buying books. I bought a lot of books. I went on an adventure to Stratford and I bought books at Goodwill because the really fancy Shakespearean ones were already closed and I was so disappointed. Anyways, this is a vlog. There'll be some cutting between things because I was really tired in the car and I thought I did such a better job of explaining things that I actually did. I kind of butchered talking about this in the car. I was a little and tired, but we're going to talk about these a little bit. So the first book that I got at the thrift store was Jane Austen at Home. I am so excited to read this. This is like one of the things that is known as one of like the best biographies about Jane Austen. I really like hers by Lucy Worsley, which we all know from her like great British accent, short hair, and things about the Tudors and Jane Austen and stuff. I am planning on reading this for Jane Austen July, and I also have Jane Austen's England, and I think these are just beautiful, and I love biographies, I love famous authors, and I love intimacy. Like I really care about like the social and the aspects of everyday life more than like the dramatic things, and I like thinking about the letters and thinking about the personal things in people's lives. So this is going to be really great. And talking about personal things and letters, I have Canada, A Portrait in Letters from 1800 to 2000. And I think these are just, a lot of these are like personal letters and stuff, and I'm really excited. I did notice after that there is a list of things, and some of these are famous people, but I think that also some of them are just kind of general people as well. One of the first one talks about a guy and his like, you know, her brother-in-law just died and we're just talking about it. So I'm really excited to talk about this, and you will now go to the car and hear about my other books, and then I'll be right back at the end of the video to talk about the other books I bought in the month.
Split Tooth by Tanya.
When you think you've done a lot better job of talking about the books than you did, Split Tooth is a book that I read in 2019. I enjoyed it a lot and I enjoy the storytelling. She's an Inuit poet and memoirist and kind of explores mythology and folklore of Indigenous people into this like beautiful story of dealing with trauma. Beautiful is the wrong word because it is very traumatic, and that's kind of where it comes in. It's hard to decide sometimes when you feel so triggered and you feel the emotion so strong that you're not sure if it's bad writing or good writing. Like I think that she is a very talented writing, but like, you know, I don't know how to talk about this book because I think it's really well done, but I did not enjoy the experience. So I think that knowing that and being more prepared, I think I'm going to reread it at some point and really enjoy it. But this is a book that I definitely wanted to have on my shelf, but definitely feel conflicted about rereading and about experience because it was so well done, but also such a hard book to read.
The other book that is Canadian is by an unknown author. This is Atticus. He writes anonymously, but I've read this before, and I believe it has the famous poem that my friend who's like, I hate all poems, I read it to her and she was like, I liked it. And I think it says, even Manet had to grow his gardens before he could paint them. And the idea of being like patient with yourself and stuff. And I really like his poetry, so I'm really excited to have a collection of his. I really like this cover, and it is a classic that I've been meaning to get to. And this is Paradise Lost by John Milton. He is the first guy who revolutionized the anti-hero and decides to be like, yes, I'm going to make Satan look like a good guy. And I love that it's just like this guy going to like a blazing sun. It's intense. I think that I've gotten a lot more into poetry and a lot more in classics and more mid-century stuff, so this is actually one that I might tackle this year. And then I also got this cute little lamp. I have been looking for like a little lamp for my desk, and I think that would be perfect. I won't even use a shade on it. And yeah, it was only like $4. Ooh, it's empty inside. So yeah, those are the books and things that I found at the thrift store, and I really love Goodwill. It's like my favorite place. My reading has been really good. I finished All Along You Were Blooming, which was just beautiful and encouraging and lovely. I really love her poems. I also finished Captain's Verses by Pablo Neruda. I am slightly less of a fan of his, especially after I had mentioned before that he uses the word little and stuff like that, and as I kind of went through, I realized that he just has so much entitlement, and the way that he treats himself, and even the famous like, if you forget me, it's like, if you love me less little by little, I will love you less little by little, and if you forget me, do not look for me because I have already forgotten you, which could be like melancholic and like self-preserving and stuff. But there's another poem being like, if you ever lose heart of me for 1 hour, I will look in another land. And he talks about like his love feeding on hers, and it's this whole idea, and the context of that makes it even worse is, you know, Mathilde, who he's writing to, is his third wife. Currently, he is like a good 10, 15, 13 years away from marrying her because, you know, he doesn't want to let her leave his second wife. And his first wife, he left and abandoned his sick child to never see again, who would die at 11 years old. Like, the dude just has a track record of staying faithful. So he's like, this whole time, like, this idea that if, you know, she ever looks aside or something like that, you know, he'll just drop her, but he has like no fidelity at all. So he's like, you have to have the utmost fidelity in like this field of betrayal that he's just going around hurting people. And yeah, everything is patronizing. And then there's other poem that I actually really liked, and it talks about how like he will continue this march after she dies, even though he would like to march back to her grave. He will march on for the cause. But again, I can't be reminded of the fact that even though she's like 10 years younger than him, he talks about him dying. And yeah, she would outlive him by like 12 years. No surprise there. But you know, it's not like, my beloved, I want you to continue fighting for this cause even if I die. It's, I will continue on even though. Like, it's such a self-centered love. And I don't know, maybe Pablo and maybe Neruda and Urrutia, I don't know how to pronounce Spanish names, but maybe they had like a beautiful love story and he wasn't patriarchal or sexist or anything like that. But the poetry just goes, and he has some other not great stuff in his biography. So it wasn't the worst poems ever, but it didn't delight me. And some of the lines were beautiful, but really there was only one poem that I liked in completion. So it's not really my cup of tea. And I was really sad because I wanted to read Pablo Neruda for such a long time. And then I finished rereading Miss Marvel, the first volume, and I really loved it. I really love the way that we look at her in Carol Danvers' bodies, because she is a 16-year-old Pakistani girl who gets these superpowers and she embiggens and changes her body and stuff. And her first thing is to change into Carol Danvers, her hero, when she's feeling insecure. And then she realizes that she still holds insecure, and she says underdressed, which I love, because so often, like, there's so much slut shaming and stuff, and it's not that she's wearing less clothes, it's just she feels vulnerable in her body, and I feel like that's such an existence. And I don't know, I love the way that it allows her to be her character, and I have read 2 volumes so far, but the volume that, see, I had a mishap when I was reading it in 2019. There was a run that went from 2014, and then the same writer continued on in 2016, and then it felt weird going back because I'd spoiled a bunch of stuff, but I really enjoyed it, and I really liked the second issue of the 2016 run. So yeah, it was all of those things where I like messed it up, and I always meant to go on, but I felt weird jumping back in the middle. So I know a bunch of stuff that happens, but I haven't actually read the second issue of the first run. So that will be fun. I'm really enjoying the show so far. And then I also have a new favorite in regards to books, plays in general. I read A Doll's House, which was just brilliant. It reminds me a lot of like Lady Windermere's Fan, or just like an Oscar Wilde or something from that era. It looks at a woman who is this doll in her husband's mind. He calls her a doll, he calls her a child, he calls her a woodland creature, but he never considers her a human throughout this whole time. And you really see how she plays with, like, you know, docile, like, little emphasized child around him to please him. And he has like, these uncomfortable, lustful thoughts about her being so small and him, like, you know, owning her and stuff. Meanwhile, she's actually really smart and stuff, and also really silly and satirical. And I laughed and, like, snorted so many times throughout this whole book. It was delightful. And I really, really recommend it. I'm already thinking about rereading it because it was so good. And then from there, I reread The Awakening. This is a book I read in 2018, and I wasn't very impressed, but I was wondering if I reread it, how I would think about it. And it's actually, I thought I would like it more, but I'm not actually liking it as much, very much either. It is a book about a woman kind of breaking free from her patriarchal things and her husband, but I don't have the character development. It's not as funny. It's just, yeah. And there's a lot of conversation about race, so I've been looking up things about that and how it does, because I didn't remember it taking place in New Orleans and that setting and stuff. And there's actually a whole essay that Toni Morrison wrote about it, and I'm trying to get it online or read it somehow, because I think that would be a really interesting aspect of learning about the book. I really like it. It's called Wedding Season, and also 1950s Housewife.
Shadows play a trick on my eyes. Creatures in my bedroom at night. Lately I have not been sleeping.
There's not actually any books here, but it still makes me really happy. I am having such a delightful morning. It has been so good. So I went to church this morning, and I met someone who went to a Bridgerton ball, which just made me so happy. I'm always happy when I get to like talk to nerds, and I'm like, yes. And I like start talking about books, and like I hope that they understand, and then I'm like, maybe they won't, but then I do, and I'm like so happy that they do. And there was also babies. There was a baby, and she was 5 weeks old, and I got to hold her, and she was just so little and cute, and it made me really happy. And then on the way home, I stopped at a little free library. There was no books, but this man, because I parked in his parking lot because it said it like there was no available parking on the street, and I'm walking out back to my car, and he's like, do you want a coffee? And I was like, no, I'm good. And he's like, are you sure? Do you need anything? And I was like, no, I just parked in your like laneway so that I could go get books. And I'm pretty sure it's the exact same wife, like him and his wife, when I was here like a year ago, they like chased me, and they were like, do you need more books? And they brought like grocery bags of books out, and we're like, there's more. So it's lovely, and I love when you get to see friendly people in the world, and it's just a beautiful Sunday morning. Saturday yesterday was delightful. I started with reading the Anthropocene Reviewed, which I love, and I was reading the plague thing, and then it like ticked some in my mind, and I started reading On Being Ill by Virginia Woolf, and I felt so seen. And I think I'm finally going to do my video about my health and stuff like that. It's something that I don't think I need to do, but it's something that I think will make me feel like I'm commemorating it in a way that isn't tragic, and I think that will be really helpful. And so many of her lines are just so beautiful, and like she's talking about how like, you know, it's it has it affects us much more than a lot of things like war and love and stuff like those affect us too, but like illness is something that we all affect, and yet it's barely ever mentioned. We like prioritize the mind and stuff, and we avoid the body. And you know, and then she talks about, but if a person was only sick, then it would lack plot. And like nothing has really resonated with me more on like the idea of like, yeah, it just feels very boring, and you don't get like this divine intervention or divine peace or whatever. It's just being ill, and it sucks, but there isn't a lot of things to say. And she talks about the metaphors and how people try to like make up groans and stuff like that to explain what pain is, and you never can. And I'm like, oh, I relate so deeply. So I felt very seen. I went on and finished The Weeping Tide by Amanda Foodie, which I really love her Ace of Shades series. This series, I'm not loving it. I don't dislike it. I think it's really lovely. The world building and like the wild lore and stuff like that is beautiful. It's just not capturing me the characters, although there were so many moments where these apprentices are like magic training and stuff like that, and they all have these ideas that everyone else is so much more confident or arrogant or all of these things. They have so many of the same insecurities, and the way that they kind of project that onto others and tear people down because they're insecure is really explored really wonderfully. And I'm excited to read the third one. I read the first two this month, and it was lovely. I found a new favorite book, which is just delightful. It is stories of Métis women, tales that my kukum told me, and I just felt so filled up. I thought that it was a collection of short stories that were fiction, but it's actually just a collection put together by the Alberta Métis Society, and like they bring it together and collect stories of these women who, a lot of them are very old, and they're telling their tales, and they're just comforting and beautiful. And like they do touch on residential schools, but it's not a story of tragic. It's a story of preserving history and talking about mischief and talking about language and preservation and religion and how they all interact. And I've never felt like so full and happy, and I just immediately wanted to like read more stories, and I really hope they do. They hope to do more stories, and I really just hope that they do, because I think it's just delightful. What else have I been reading? And then from there, I started Unreconciled by Jesse Wente. He's an Indigenous Canadian who grew up in Toronto and went to school there, and kind of talks about his experience and talks about raising his children and going to broadcast. And it's so good so far. Like, it has that storytelling. I think it was advertised as like part memoir and part manifesto. And I love that style when he's talking about his stories, and then he's also talking about how it relates to the broader world and how it feels to kind of be biracial, and his experience and how those are erased and how they haven't been. And yeah, even his experience of like wanting to do acting and them all telling him to have blonde hair, and then he didn't have blonde hair, and then eventually he did, and how that created more profiling and stuff like that. And even his now wife, like, you know, she was stopped and like asked if she was safe and stuff like that. And these are often minor things. Like, he felt embarrassed and stuff because it happened so often, and he didn't want to tell his, you know, white girlfriend about this experience. And I think that so many of these stories, and then he talks about how during the time when Indian Horse was released and other things around it, and how he was really disappointed not being directed by Indigenous people, and he'd kind of recommended that it was still good, but he hoped that, you know, it would go back to own voices. And then there was two others which were highly problematic that he said shouldn't be shown at all. And the story where he had some complaints, that one was shunned as a Canadian film that was like low budget, and the two American films that were high budget and completely disrespected history and were terrible just got shown. I'm really enjoying it. He's relating to Thomas King and stuff, which I have just fallen in love with that man's writing. So it's lovely. I love talking about the context of Canada and the ways that the stories have happened. And even though these stories deal with racism and the experience of them, I also find it just really uplifting and happy. Like, not happy because it's not happy without pain or without any things or ignoring them, but I just enjoy listening to him talk, and I enjoy hearing his stories and the hope. And I think that there is that imbuing hope behind all of the despair, that he hopes in a better future. He wants reconciliation. This is how we're going to create a world that is more inclusive for Indigenous people, who give them the rights and, you know, give them proper respect and stuff like that, and a voice, is by doing this. And I'm so happy. Okay, I am back to talk about the books that I bought, and then I'm going to wrap up for the weekend. I hope that you had a great time following me on my little adventures of reading and writing
And I did do some writing. I didn't actually chronicle that, but you know, reading and writing and some book buying, as you should always do. These are books that I bought earlier in the year. I think that these were all $2, and I was really rejoiced when I saw Dreams of the Father. I really like Becoming. It's like the memoir that made me realize I love memoirs. So I've been excited to read this for a while, and I like that he read this before he kind of had many political things. I think it came out right after like law school and stuff, when he was just meeting Michelle and stuff. So I think that this will be a very interesting book and chronicling. And then on the other end of his career, we have The Promised Land, which is by him. And I was surprised. I got this for $2, and it is like $45 Canadian. So this made me really happy. It is bigger than my head, but I think it's going to be delightful and wonderful. And yeah, oh, he has a little American flag. Of course he does. So yeah, I'm surprised and looking forward to how this will look compared to Becoming, because I really like Becoming, but it's more intimate and personal, and I feel like this might be a little bit more, you know, political, but I also don't know that much. I know like the broad strokes and how people talk about him, but I'm not American. I don't know that much. But the other find in this like random thrift store with like, it's like way in the back behind the wires of random things, I found this, and I found Wolf Hall, and this is by Hilary Martel. I read this and really loved it in the winter time. It was one of my last books of 2021, and I think I actually want to reread it before I continue on the series, because it just had so much information, and she's so well known for her research and stuff, and I'm just really excited to dive back into this and enjoy it. And yeah, I really look forward to reading more of her books in the future. And then I have 2 random books. This is a book that I've been trying to discover for a while because I do not know where it came from. And it's got Smuggler. This is a book about a dude smuggling things into Russia, I believe. It just randomly showed up on my doorstep. And I'm like, who's sending me Christian nonfiction? But that's a mysterious thing that I might never figure out. Unless someone actually did send it to me, I'm still confused. And then my background is theology, and I do research and stuff like that into it. So I have this book, which is Convergence, which I was looking kind of at like just church and things like that, and the way we approach things and how we can approach things better and stuff. So it's been interesting, been making lots of notes. I don't often talk about like the kind of nonfiction books, because a lot of these, like, I'm not planning on reading this cover to cover, but it is heavily notated in things, fairly heavily notated in things. You can never tell with the shine, but yeah, I'm excited. I have been reading a lot of these pages. So that is kind of my weekend. I was really disappointed in Awakening, kind of disappointed in Captain's Verses, but I had some shine. I'm almost done Unreconciled, and I'm really, really excited for it. And yeah, I will see you again soon. Happy reading, writing, and see you then.